Type 1 is kindly co-sponsored by Dexcom UK and Ireland. The Dexcom CGM system sends glucose readings to your compatible smart device up to every 5 minutes with directional arrows that tell you which way your glucose is going. Head to dexcom.com to get started. Hi everyone and welcome to Type 1, a podcast that delves into the obscure, complex and challenging world of life with Type 1 diabetes. I'm Jen Greaves, and each week with the help of some brilliant guests, I'll be showing that there is no normal when it comes to handling this whopper of a chronic condition, because we're all pretty much figuring out the messiness of day-to-day life with diabetes as we go. And most of all, even though it doesn't always feel like it, we are absolutely not alone. My guest this week is Dave. Dave is a now retired investment banker. He's had type 1 diabetes for 30 years and has been undergoing treatment for chronic myeloid leukemia for the past 5 years. And he also beat testicular cancer in 2004. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Straight off the bat, that's quite the intro. So
it definitely is.
We've got a lot to talk about. Should we start chronologically?
Yeah, why not? I think it was a bit of a surprise getting diabetes at the ripe old age of around about 19, but even more so being told it was age onset diabetes at that age as well. And I picked up some of the signs that were quite typical of being diabetic because my father's a diabetic. And yeah, it was a real challenge to deal with right at the outset. You know, you're starting your career, you're kind of like, well, okay, want to get married, want to have a family eventually and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you're hit with, well, now you're diabetic. And how's that going to affect the way that things are going to happen in the future?
Is that how you felt when you received that diagnosis?
Yeah, I suppose you'd phrase it now saying overwhelmed. And I suppose the only thing that came out of it straight away was being put on a diabetic diet, as they called it then, you know, given 3 sheets of paper and this is what you should eat. And
what did that consist of?
Weetabix, I think, in the mornings, no more than 1 sandwich for lunch and a biscuit before you went to bed. Yeah, it's changed a lot over the 30 years. But the upside was I think I lost just over 2 stone in about 8 or 9 weeks. So that was the only plus that came out of it really at the outset. Every
cloud, but you weren't put on insulin at this point?
No. I progressed sometime later onto tablets. Did that for a few years. And then I was at a point where I was getting married. And about 3 weeks before getting married, I progressed onto insulin.
So previous to that, were they treating it as type 2, essentially?
Yeah. So it was kind of, well, we think you're a type 2. We'll go down this path. It just seems a bit different. And this is the way to deal with it. And I was using the NHS at that point. And that's when I first kind of got myself using my private medical health, which I had because of the career that I had, to get a endo specialist to try and help me further. He was the one that actually progressed me almost immediately onto insulin.
It's quite astounding, really, I think, hearing that now, that you could go, 3 years?
Just over, yeah.
Without insulin when your body actually really needed it. And were you testing blood sugars at this time?
I was testing blood sugars, but then that was peeing on a stick, you know, ad hoc, once a week. Yeah, very different control.
My goodness.
Very different control.
And did you feel well? Did you feel okay?
I felt tired a lot.
I bet.
Yeah, but I put it down to work, you know, life, going out, etc., buying a house at 19 and everything that goes with that. Then obviously looking to get married, and then 3 weeks before, right, okay, you're starting on insulin, and I've now got needles, and I've got a syringe, and how's this all work? Hypos, what are those? And
my goodness.
Yeah.
With the introduction of insulin around that time, which doesn't sound like it was a very, quote, normal routine time for you.
No, definitely not.
How did you handle that? Were there any sort of interesting first experiences?
Well, I think first off is like, I'm a pincushion. How do I deal with all this? And Now I've got to check my blood sugars more as well. Like, you should at least do it once a day. Okay. Which even now you kind of go, no, you check it a hell of a lot more unless you've got, like a Dexcom or something like that to be able to monitor it real time. The other thing was not really knowing much about hypo symptoms, driving. Could I be going into a hypo whilst I'm about to go out driving or at the wheel? Just where do I keep it all when going away on a honeymoon, and went to the Dominican Republic, and now, it's really hot. My insulin seems to be working faster than it did before. And, now what do I do? There was nothing, the guidance, etc. wasn't there. There wasn't where I could just, Google this, Google that. It was, what you heard there and what you picked up in pamphlets and so forth. So it's very much self-education.
And just in terms of processing the fact that you thought you had, I guess, one condition, and then suddenly being told, no, that's a real switch. Like, how was your wedding day in terms of, were you checking your blood sugars?
I was checking my blood sugars. I had a packet of Polos in my suit. I remember checking my blood sugars in the pub directly opposite the church, and making sure that I wasn't going to hypo or anything like that, and ruining the point where I go, I do.
Very well thought through.
Yeah, definitely.
You grasped all that very quickly. I don't think I would have had that grasp in like 3 weeks, And I talk about routine, but your life at that time was quite a high-pressured kind of hectic existence.
Very hectic, travelling a lot, working abroad, a lot of time in Germany, living out there as well for some time. And then throughout my career, travelling a hell of a lot and living in the Middle East for a few years as well. And it's always challenging dealing with all that travel. I remember a flight back from Mexico City and staff going, you've been asleep the whole flight. We weren't sure if there was a problem because I remember you told us that we were diabetic, but we didn't want to wake you. I'm thinking, that's not necessarily the best way to look at it. I wish you had woken me for breakfast.
Were you quite vocal in the fact that you said, you told the staff that you were diabetic?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my father. My father, being diabetic, saw it as, and I think still does, a badge of shame. Whereas I kind of go, I'm diabetic. It's normal. Yeah, I'm not the only person with diabetes. Yeah, there's that number that always gets bandied around, 3 million plus. But they've been saying that number for about the past 30 years, so I think it's a lot higher than that. It is what it is. There's people with other illnesses, chronic illnesses, etc.
Did your father's approach to his condition have any impact on you?
Yeah, I would say yin-yang is probably the best way to look at it. Trying to deal with it by ignoring it. I'm not sure if that's the way he would look at it, but that's the way that I interpreted it. And I think that influenced the way that I tackled it differently, going, it's here to stay. Yeah, it's one thing that I've learned over the years that I can't beat. You're never going to win. And so therefore you've got to play nice with diabetes. He's
such a prominent figure in your life. Having that as your sort of benchmark, I guess, did you have any other role models, or were you aware of anyone else with type 1 diabetes?
Not really. I think it's just my father. But throughout my working career, I've come across people which are diabetic. I had one such case in Germany where I was sitting in a business meeting on a trading floor, and the guy went DKA on me.
Wow.
And luckily I knew what to do because of being diabetic. It's quite interesting to see how a lot of people just didn't know what to do. I think that was quite early on in my career. And I think that was a trigger point for me as well, making sure people were aware, because I never wanted to be in a position where no one was around me that couldn't help me. I'd rather have someone helping me than being taken away in an ambulance.
I always think it is such a conflicting condition in that way, because you get to go about your life for the most part as you wish, but when it gets to those points, you're suddenly and so quickly so vulnerable. It's so dangerous so quickly. Whereas 5 minutes ago, you could have been just going about your life.
Yeah.
And I think having those moments, they really sort of remind you.
It's a real trigger to go, I am really human here. And it can be quite fragile at times. And I need people to look out for me as much as I look out for myself. You realise that, is it really a weakness being diabetic, or is it a strength? I'm more aware of my body. I'm more aware of what I eat. I'm aware of the benefits of exercise, though there are a lot of complications. And that's the real challenge, is dealing with the complications that come with diabetes. And I think that can be more of a challenge than the diabetes itself.
And unfortunately, you have suffered quite serious complications.
Yeah.
We'll come back to the eyesight in a bit. So in 2004, you were diagnosed with testicular cancer.
Yes, I went in to see the local GP, a locum at the time, and got told that they thought I had an infection. Gave me some nice heavy-duty antibiotics. A couple of days later, I was at home in bed feeling unwell on those antibiotics, and a voice in my head kind of said, there's something more serious here. So I went back. I got a telephone number to get a referral to go and see a specialist. And within 24 hours, I was under the surgeon's knife because the cancer was a particular type and very aggressive, and later got told, after it all been checked out, 6 to 8 weeks, it could have been terminal. So I'm a great believer in listening to the voice in your head and always getting a second opinion.
I mean, tell us a little bit about that time, like for you, your family. I'm assuming work suddenly took a back seat.
Work took a back seat. Life couldn't take a back seat because my wife was pregnant with her third child, a few months in as well. Leading up to that, they say things come in threes. We'd had a bereavement in the family. The pregnancy the start of the pregnancy hadn't gone well, and we weren't sure whether or not there was going to be complications there as well. So there was a lot of stress going on, and then we get hit with this. And you kind of go, how do I deal with it? And I don't know where I got the inner strength from, but I realised that I seemed to deal with it differently only years later, when the specialist that had operated on me asked me to counsel a couple of patients that had the same type of cancer. And I got to see their reaction, which was almost like polar opposite. Theirs was very negative, very looking for someone to blame, looking for a reason, whereas mine was, right, okay, it is what it is. How do I tackle this? How do I beat it? And how do I move forward? Because I always say, always need to move forward in life. And sometimes I'm going to fall over. But if I fall forward, I can get back up.
How did the people you then counselled interpret that? Were they open to that viewpoint? Because I imagine obviously every reaction is valid. And I personally couldn't tell you how I would react in that situation. Is it possible for people's outlook and perspective to change when they're going through things like this, and diabetes as well, or any sort of point of stress or trauma?
I think the way that I was talking with them, again, it was with their partners as well. It wasn't where I was trying to push and project the way that I handled it onto them. I just tried to give them a different approach, a different way of looking at it, and never judge the way that they were dealing with it.
Your surgery happened so quickly, and then you got told if it had been left any longer that the outcome could have been quite different. Was there any time there where you were left wondering what might happen?
I think that never leaves you. I think for us, a big marker of progressing forward was a year after, and having gone through the intensive chemotherapy as well, dealing with losing your hair, which now later on in life, I've lost a fair bit anyway, so it doesn't really matter. We celebrated by it was our 10-year wedding anniversary. We christened our two youngest children. I got christened as well, and we had a celebration of life. And I think that was a real marker then, 12 months down the line, to say, well, okay, it's happened. We've dealt with it. We've beaten it, as we believe. It doesn't leave you. You're constantly being checked year after year. But every year it becomes a little less of a worry. There's always that little voice in your head, or as I call it, my little golem. And sometimes it's whispering and sometimes it's screaming. But it gets quieter and quieter, or it did then. It got quieter and quieter every year.
Is that something you can relate to day-to-day life with diabetes at all? Or would you say it's just completely different in a sense of like some days diabetes seems to have a very loud voice and other days it sits a little bit nicely?
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Yeah, it is like that. Some days you're managing your insulin, you're trying to manage your life, and your insulin dosage doesn't seem to match up with what you've been eating. You've got stressors around you going on, or you might be coming down with a cold, or something else is happening, and you can't add everything up. And the voice in your head goes, you can't sort this out. You're not winning today. But then there's other days where everything goes perfectly, and you've just got to deal with it in the now, in the present, and go, right, okay, this is today. What's going to happen today? Why is it not working? Can I accept it, or can I change it?
And talk to me a little bit about how diabetes was impacted or affected by chemotherapy and how that relationship works.
That was interesting. That was, I shall be taking insulin until it goes out of fashion. How big a dose shall I take now? Oh, no, that's not enough. I think I'll take some more.
Really?
Yeah, because you've got the chemo going through you. You got the steroids as well. You're drinking tons of fluids as well to help flush your system. Food-wise, that becomes very basic, of not what you want to eat, it's what you can eat and be comfortable with. I'm lucky in the fact that I wasn't too nauseous. And I do remember some magic tablets they prescribed me, which helped deal with that. But again, foods were very plain. And so therefore you don't have a lot of variety and a lot of options to play around with your diet and manage your insulin. I put on a hell of a lot of weight during that period. As I joke, going through chemo was brought to you by jogging bottoms. The more elasticated they could be, the better. And you kind of go, I'm starting to look a little more like a balloon. But you just have to accept it. And after time, it drops off and you start to get more control of your diabetes again. But yeah, it's a real challenge. Yeah. And your fingers get really sore as well at that point because you're pricking them so often and your skin's so sensitive anyway, going through the chemo. So yeah, it's not a comfortable time. It's not a time I would like to go back to.
No. And obviously your immune system is taking a real hit.
Yeah, definitely.
So how does that work with?
You also become quite housebound, or I did in my experience, because you don't want to go out. You don't want to risk catching something. Everyone around you is put on alert. If anyone's got sniffles, etc., please don't come round, because you're just not going to be able to fight an infection very well. And the fatigue as well is atrocious. So your bed becomes very comfortable, very attached to it. And this is all before, Sky box sets and so forth and Netflix. So it's right. How many DVDs can I get through a day, and or how many hours am I going to sleep today?
And that's such a different existence to the one you were living before, where you were flying all around the world, living in lots of different countries. Not really having a great deal of a routine.
No, definitely not. And that's always been a challenge. Is that if you don't have a routine, managing your diabetes is more difficult, to say the least.
That chemotherapy treatment was successful?
Yes.
And everything went back to, quote, normal, or?
Normal and faster. I kind of said, right, okay, I've beaten cancer, so I can beat anything. I'm now going to get back on the carousel. I'm going to make it go really, really, really fast. So I spent even more time at work and worked harder and longer hours, and socialised more as well, to the point that I made the carousel go too fast, and I had to go and take a 3-month sabbatical just to kind of deal with it all, slow down, realise what I'd been through, and that trying to speed my way through the rest of my life was not going to fulfill me or fulfill my family. And so, yeah, we had a 3-month sabbatical and had a great time having holidays, etc., with the family, and gave me time to reflect and to slow down a bit. Though people around me don't think I really slowed down, though I felt I did. So there was a win there.
Do you think that's your nature? Obviously, you went into a career at a very young age that you probably knew wasn't going to be a sort of low-key, local kind of existence. So is it almost that your reaction to going through something that made you quite vulnerable was to live as much as possible and do as much as possible?
Yeah, I think it was. I think that's where I first coined my phrase as well in my head, live life large. Which has been a mantra ever since now, because life is to be lived. And if I can say it, you need to have a bucket list, because it's not a bucket list, because a bucket list is for the dying, and you've always got to be thinking about living. And it can be the simplest thing to the most complicated thing. But you've got to do something. You've got to do something new, something challenging regularly, so that you feel alive, and you're enjoying it. And as importantly, those around you are enjoying being with you, and you're able to give the best side of yourself to them as well.
And is that maybe what was lacking in that period after you successfully beat cancer, that it was all a bit too much to the point that, everyone else was dizzying around as well?
I think that's a really good view. Yeah. It almost became very blinkered and very focused, and just looking at the end all the time, just running at 100 miles an hour. And that's not sustainable at the end of the day. And yeah, we're all going to end up at the same place. Though some might say some might be warmer than others. And you might as well just enjoy as much as you can along the way, and more so as well, help as many people as possible along the way. And
is that something that has sort of shifted and developed since your second diagnosis?
Definitely. I think the business that I went into is a lot of take. It's fast paced. There's a lot of adrenaline rush that goes with it. And on the other side of the coin, there was always a lot of development as well. With all the people that I worked with, I was very focused on self-development for them and developing their careers. And I think that was where I got my taste of that give back within the environment I was in. But when then being diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, and again, that was an interesting diagnosis. On the Friday was GP telling me, it's not leukemia. We've checked your blood. We don't know what it is, though. So go away and enjoy your weekend. So on the Monday, I go and see a specialist, and I get told, yes, it is leukemia. You're on the cusp of it being really bad, and if we can't do anything, you've got 9 months. So that was a bit different, and my way of dealing with it then, I laughed at him. And I went, I'll be laughing at you every year going forward, because you've never met me until today, and I've already beat cancer once, so I can beat it again.
And what was the response to that?
Silence. I don't think he'd ever had a patient react like that. And subsequently, over the years, we've spoken and got to know each other. I found out that is the truth. And also, he's never had a patient, in my case, where I've never said, is this going to kill me? Because, as I said earlier, we're all going to get there eventually. So whatever it is, it will be. So enjoy life as much as possible until that point.
And that diagnosis where you were told you had 9 months was in which year?
Oh, that's just over 5 years ago. So if we do the maths, that's what, 2014?
Right.
Yeah. So it's a lot has changed since then, because at that point you deal with that. You know that your blood sugars and your management of your blood sugars has been challenging leading up to that period as well. You're now being put on chemo, which is a challenge in itself because you can't get the chemo that you want, chemotherapy that you want on the NHS. Luckily, I'm able to get it privately to keep me ticking. Then the next challenge you get hit is you lose your sight.
Yeah,
Literally 3 months or so later, I was getting out the bath, and I looked up and I thought, oh, there's a spider. What's that doing up there in the corner? And it wasn't. It was blood trickling inside my eye. I go and get it checked, and in a matter of weeks, I undergo some reviews, and then it was more a matter of months. I had some treatment, and best way to say is that treatment wasn't the right treatment. And then I get told that I could be permanently blind within 9 to 12 weeks, and there's nothing that they think they can do anymore. So I find one of the best eye surgeons in the world, a chap called Riaz Azaria, and goes to see him, and we strike up a rapport, and fast forwarding 6 months later, I get my sight back. To an extent, I've got 30% in my left eye and 70% in my right eye. So between the two of them, they make one good one.
What was it in you at that time when you were told you're permanently going to lose your sight that made you seek a possible option? To have that instinct, again, we're going back to instinct here. And I guess you'd had the experience of the treatment before where you'd been very defiant and...
I think that's it. You kind of go, oh, déjà vu. I feel like I've been here before for something else. And you've got that inner voice. So there's got to be another way. And I suppose with my career as well, I've never taken no as very well. There's always a way. There's always a way of doing something. And I wanted to look for that option, and I had the right support network around me with my family as well, which is really important and makes a big difference. And that enabled me to find the guy who, thanks to him, I'm still alive and ticking and having sight so that I can enjoy the best of life. But they were dark times, literally.
Yeah, talk to me about having your world completely shut off, still dealing with chemotherapy, battling leukemia, and having to manage type 1 diabetes as well, and support a family, and you've got other people going through this with you. Yeah,
it's a best way is I described it like being a boxer in the ring, but it was an unfair fight.
Sounds pretty unfair to me.
Yeah. So I'm kind of like, right, okay, I've got someone coming in the ring and he's now going to box me for my diabetes. I've got someone boxing me for the leukemia, and now I've got someone boxing me to maintain my sight. And you've got all the fatigue to deal with going on with this, the mental anguish as well. And during that period, it did get really challenging. And some real dark thoughts, because I know it sounds a bit corny, but it could not see any light at the end of the tunnel, literally at that point. And
was it the sight specifically that sort of tipped your way of thinking and your outlook?
It was a tipping point. My eldest daughter was a great help during that time with thoughts and quotes, etc., which were very positive and made me reframe and rethink where I was. And at the point where I managed to get my left eye, begin to get that back, though different, whereby it is only 30% odd, but it's also a 30% that's distorted. So there's bits missing which your brain makes up if you look at a landscape. But if I look at writing in a book or etc., I can't see certain words. They're blanked out. And everything's larger as well with my left eye, just marginally, which is quite weird.
Is it quite dizzying?
I've learnt to deal with it, but at first, as you get the sight back, you can get double vision as well. And over time, it's got better, but I've had lots of intensive surgery, injections into my eyes as well, which is a novel experience. Luckily, I'm used to needles with being diabetic, but yes.
Ypsomed MyLife Diabetes Care proudly co-sponsors Type 1 on 1. The MyLife Ypsa pump is not only the smallest and lightest insulin pump available, its open system and app means a continuous or flash glucose monitor can be incorporated, and you'll get software updates as soon as they're ready. No waiting for your pump renewal date. Super easy to learn and super discreet to wear. Find out more at the MyLife Diabetes Care website. Talk to me a little bit about going from someone with sight with diabetes to someone without sight in terms of the practicalities of testing your blood sugar, knowing where your meter is, dialing up a dose.
I start to use sound more, the clicks, counting the clicks on the pen, whereas before I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to think about that. Putting the cap back on the needle, I didn't need to think at all about that. Easily finding my pinch point and injecting myself. Oh, I didn't inject it myself. I injected it into my finger. It becomes challenging, and you learn to adjust, and you have to adjust, but it's really frustrating because I suddenly felt old overnight, and I felt like I'd aged 30 plus years in a matter of weeks.
And how did your brain process that?
Negatively, first off. It adjusts because it has to, because the survival instinct kicks in. Because if you don't do this, you can, within 48 hours or so, you're not going to be in a good way as a diabetic. And you have to get assistance as well from those around you to help you manage your diabetes, and what's my blood sugar say on the monitor and things like that, and what limited sight have I got left, and can I go out and buy some off-the-shelf glasses with, plus whatever to look like Mr. Magoo, so that at least I can see straight some point of what my blood sugar is. Trying to test it, because trying to get the stick underneath your finger and so forth, that's where you need help. And I was quite stubborn, and it's tell me left a bit, right a bit, so that I could use other sensory functions to try and find a way around it. Sometimes I couldn't. Where the operations were going on, etc., it was, oh dear, I'm really going to need help here. And dealing with hypos as well, that real challenge as well, because where's the stuff that's on the side of the bed, scrambling for it, or there's a drink there and trying not to knock over the drink, and it's a different world.
And there's an urgency there with a hypo as well.
Yeah.
Not having your sight is such a huge part.
And you become very reliant on your partner and my children as well to help support. And I've always been very independent, and I found that a real challenge in itself as well.
And they sound like they've been the most incredible source of support for you.
Definitely.
Through all this.
They've gone through a lot with me. It's not just been, as a phrase I don't like to, my journey as such. It's been very much theirs as well. And without their love, their support, I know I wouldn't have got through it.
You also retired early.
Yes, I always said I wanted to retire in my 40s. This wasn't quite what I had planned, though.
Was that quite a period of adjustment in terms of you being at home?
Most definitely. At one point in my career, I spent almost a couple of years away, and we'd commute to see each other every 6-8 weeks or so. And now I'm home, and the first year was real really challenging, not only because I'm home with going through these issues, right, losing my sight, etc. I'm actually there 24/7, and that's a novel experience for everyone. And who is Dad now? Yeah, he's not working. He's really ill, and what's Dad all about? And me trying to find my place of going, well, who am I now, and what's my future going to be, and how long's my future going to be?
Talk to me a bit about the first day you could see something again.
That was a good friend of mine taking me up in a black cab up for further treatment to see my specialist. And it was being able to read a number plate on a black cab in front of him and see a London red bus.
Quite iconic.
Yes, yeah. Those are the first two things I really remember.
Could you believe it?
Not really. And I thought it was a bit ironic going, well, oh, okay, that's not necessarily spectacular, is it? Yeah, what's the first thing you're looking at? Oh, it's a number plate. It's not a fantastic piece of scenery. But it's a step. It's a step forward. It's a major step forward. And going from not being, when you do the simple eye test, yeah, not being able really to be able to read the first line. Yeah. And then gradually, as you go through the treatment, at some points not being able to see it virtually at all, and then working your way down that list. And that, getting pleasure from it. I never thought that would be. Anyone who wears glasses or gets their eyes tested, would you ever think you'd get pleasure just reading out or from the board the letters?
Amazing.
Yeah. Again, it's a simple thing, but as I said earlier, live life large. At that point, that was large for me.
Yeah. So we talked a bit earlier about how after the first treatment for cancer, you went absolutely 100 miles an hour, and things start to progress here for you. You get your sight back. You're still undergoing treatment today, but you live life large in a slightly different way.
In a different way, yeah. I can't make things go 100 miles an hour. I now have two speeds, start and stop. That's it. I have periods where I have trouble controlling my blood sugars significantly, the chronic fatigue as well, and thankfully there's Netflix and Sky box sets and so forth, and my dog as well. And we kind of like just sit on the sofa, and my dog's able to pick up that I'm not feeling well as well, and will not leave my side all day. And then there's other days where I feel a bit more human, and so therefore I can go out and I can live life a bit more as well. But regardless of which day it is, I try to do something, regardless of how small it is, but it's an achievement. And that's my live life large moment that day.
It's relative to you that day.
It's relative to what, to my state of mind, my state of health. It's my live life large moment.
And it's incredible achievement given the circumstances, what you're going through, what you've gone through. I think it's amazing. I also think that is relatable to the people listening who may not be going through cancer, but some days I think getting through the day as a type 1 diabetic is a huge achievement. Those days where it beats you over the head and it just, like we said earlier, is shouting at you. It doesn't want to take a back seat. You know, I certainly put this pressure on myself sometimes, and you feel like potentially that's a day of failing. But actually to get through that day, I think we can say is a live life large, right?
Yeah, I would go along with that. And there's those days where you're going, right, okay, my algorithm's set for this. I'm doing this type of activity. I've eaten this amount of carbohydrates. This is my insulin dosage. Computer says no. It just doesn't add up. And your body's going, no. And your blood sugars are going higher and higher and higher. And going, I don't want to be doing this. I can't work it out. And I think long gone are the days where I would sit there and beat myself up. Because now I just go, it is what it is, right? This is what my body is doing. and it's not doing what my mind wants it to do. It's got a mind of its own, and all I can do is try and be the best me by making the best adjustments to sort it out. And if you do that, I don't think you can ask much more yourself.
Exactly. And you're still in chemotherapy now, right?
I am. I'm on chemo until the lights go out.
And forgive me for my ignorance, but compared to the chemotherapy treatment you were describing earlier, where you were bedbound and etc., and we've talked about you have days of chronic fatigue, you look to me really quite well, if I can say that.
Thank you. Yeah. Basically, is you can't always see that someone's unwell, but I think even more so in our day and age now, where we talk about mental well-being, mental health, and so forth. There's a lot of illnesses out there that you can't see on people, but it's going on. I think I probably eat the cleanest I've ever been, though I do like the occasional McDonald's milkshake now and again, which is bad temptation. But, a little bit of what you fancy now and again, it's not a bad thing. And you've got to live life. So
a large milkshake.
Most definitely. Yeah.
Live
chocolate.
Life large.
Yeah, live life large.
Live life large,
yeah.
chocolate.
Chocolate, of course. And not everyone can see what's going on with you. As much as I'm aware of that of myself, I'm a lot more aware of that of others, especially going from the point where I didn't have my sight as well. It's given me a significant more awareness of my being and those around me. And I've put myself more in a position where, with what I've been through, can I support others? Is there something that I can do to help someone just day to day in a conversation? There's a young lady who I'm helping mentor at the moment, whose 8-year-old daughter has just been diagnosed as type 1 diabetic. And you begin to realise how overwhelming it is for such a young child to now be diabetic. And again, there's so many variables with a young child in their day-to-day. They don't have a routine as such. And the challenges of trying to get the right supports, medical equipment and so forth, that's a myriad of minefields to go through. And having done an NLP course for neuro-linguistic programming and being practitioner qualified, that served well to help me with my mental well-being.
Was it about that sense of identity after you stopped working?
Yeah, I needed something to challenge my mind, and I wanted something that would benefit me and something that I could use to benefit others. Not in a professional capacity, just when I talk to people, being the best version of myself to be able to help someone else as well. And I think if you can do something to help others, I think it's really important throughout life, because there's a lot of people that are lonely out there dealing with things just on their shoulders and who are afraid to ask for help. And I was only saying it to someone the other week, I said, don't be afraid to ask for help. People will always help at the end of the day, because it's human nature.
On that note, if someone is sort of struggling with anything to do with any of this, or any chronic condition or any mental health issue, you've been very vocal about the fact that you've had a great network of support in your family. You've had access to great surgeons, and you've also had the confidence to question what you've been told. For people who maybe don't feel like they have that voice or they don't have that access, what would you say to them?
Wow, that's a good question. I think you need to look within yourself to find that strength to ask that question, because we're all capable of it. I'm definitely nothing special. I'm just someone that got ill and have dealt with it my way. I'm not necessarily saying that's the right way, the best way, whatever, but it's the way that's enabled me to still be here with my family. I think everyone needs to draw from themselves and bring that voice forward to the forefront so that they ask the questions and they stand up. It's not easy. There's times where I've not been able to do it and people have taken over for me. But it's in us. It's in all of us. We just need to draw on it.
And I think you even sharing your story with me today is incredibly powerful because you've sat here and shown me what's possible and also what matters, I think, and what to fight for, what is worth standing up for. And that in itself is very powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All this time you've been on injections.
Yes.
And you're currently on a pump, is that right?
Yeah.
So what was the turning point there?
Turning point, I would say it was like turning a tanker, big oil tanker, because I'd been trying to get the pump for some years. And it was finally, I think, my third letter to local NHS hospital telling them that I was going to come in via A&E if I couldn't get better control of my diabetes with the challenging chronic conditions that I've got to deal with, impacting it further. And luckily someone read it.
So you're saying that the impact of the chemotherapy and the treatment and your general immune state of health was giving you really challenging control to the
very,
point.
very challenging control. From one day to the next, not having any real constant. And with that, big swings, hypos and so forth, and really nasty highs. And that's a real challenge to live with, let alone dealing with the chronic conditions at the same time as well. I'm lucky where I am in the sense that it is the care from the diabetic nurses and that is second to none, and they really looked closely at my situation. They got to understand what was going on with me as a person, not as just a number. I had to go through some regimented hoops, to tick all the right boxes. Once the consultant realised that I wasn't going to leave his room until we had agreement, and I think he was getting bored with me, he finally signed off. I did the right courses that I needed to go on, and then I went on the pump literally 1 year and 1 week ago. And it's been fantastic. The only thing that I missed from being on the injections was not having anything attached to me.
I think that's quite common.
Yeah, the worst thing is when you forget that the pump's in your pocket and you go to the bathroom. Yeah, that's an ouch moment. Of anyone that's on an insulin pump, you'll know what I mean.
So yours is a tube pump. It's an Ipso pump, is that right?
Yeah, Ipso pump. Yeah.
And now we know what you mean.
And there's definitely a real difference from managing the old method of a pen to the new method of an insulin pump. And the insulin pump gives me such more control and less of the roller coaster spikes and troughs that get with an insulin pen.
Your story about having to sort of fight for your insulin pump is one that many will recognise or currently be dealing with. And two things that strike me is your care team viewing you as a human, and the other one that struck me was that you were willing to play your part and do your bit and tick the boxes that you needed to tick to get there, which I think most people are absolutely willing to do. But it's dancing that dance, isn't it? It
was a challenge. And as you say, dancing that dance, as my kids say, I'm good at dad dancing and that's it. I did find that frustrating. And throughout life, I've always been the one to look for the shortcut. What's the fastest way to get to point B? I realise that the NHS doesn't quite work like that. And it's got its checks and balances for its own reasons. And I just realised I've got to go with it, because by doing that, I would get the pump and I would get that second chance of being able to get better control of my blood sugars. If I can get better control of my blood sugars, my quality of life and my length of life could be longer. And that gives me more time to be mischievous for the rest of my life. So, and have as much fun as possible as well in a selfish way. But that everyone wants to live, right? So, and if that helps me live life large a bit better, then that's the way to go.
And one more thing that's been recurring throughout this is your wife, your face lights up when you talk about her. How has going through all this impacted your relationship? How have you worked through these really challenging times to come to where you are today?
She is my rock. Hopefully I feel like we don't function without each other. I joke I'm still around here so I can torment her as much as possible for the rest of my life. And yeah, do we agree on everything? No, because obviously she's always right, as I've said before. But is it the love of each other and strength that we draw from each other? Probably, hopefully, that's it. Her determinedness as well to make sure that when I was down, I looked to pick myself up, or in that case, having help to be picked up as well, because you can't always get up yourself. As I say, if you fall over, fall forward, then it's easier to get up. That is something that I'm privileged to have, and I recognise not everyone has that. But I'd like to think there's always someone out there that is thinking of someone at the time when they're going through something difficult and would take time out to help someone.
I think that's a very nice note to end on. Dave, thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege and honour to talk to you. You're incredibly inspiring, and your openness and willingness to talk to me about your story is, I think, going to resonate with a lot of people. And may you continue to live life large with as much chocolate as you see fit.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Type 1-on-1. Please remember that nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as medical advice. I'm definitely not a healthcare professional. If you like what you hear, hit subscribe and do leave a little review on iTunes if you have time. It really helps to spread the word about type 1 diabetes. You can find me at Miss Jen Greaves across all the platforms, and the podcast show notes live at missjengreaves.com. Thanks again to Dexcom UK and Ireland and Ipsomed My Life Diabetes Care for sponsoring this episode. And thank you so much for listening.